the studios in Roy Rogers' Apple Valley Inn. Good morning, everybody. Once again, it's 9:30 and it's Friday, and it's time for Fanny's Forum. Now broadcasting live and direct from the Sportsman's Den in the beautiful Roy Rogers' Apple Valley Inn. Here she is, Fanny Dunnicliff.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael Dixon, for bringing me on the air. This is Fanny Dunnicliff, broadcasting live from the Sportsman's Den, and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening. And now this morning, we're going to discuss a marvelous book. It's indeed a historical book that has been researched by my guest this morning, Erma Peirson. She has done a marvelous job. It's a beautifully written book. And of course, will go down in the archives as truly a historical story of the Mojave River and its valley. And first, I'd like to introduce my guests. Erma Peirson, the author. Good morning, Erma.
Good morning.
How are you this morning?
Wonderful.
Nice to have you, and what a great book. And my second guest, of course, who has been very, very close to this book, is our own Inez Huffman. Good morning, Inez.
Good morning, Fanny.
It seems like old times to have Inez on. We see each other quite a bit, don't we?
We certainly do.
And of course, Inez did the dust jacket and the frontispiece for Erma's very, very fine book. It's called The Mojave River and Its Valley. So I think the very first thing we should do is talk about this very paradoxical river. If I may, there are little memory jams at the top of each chapter. And this one, the first chapter, is called River Paradox. And if I may, this little memory jam is by Henry Van Dyke. And it says, "It is with rivers as it is with people. The greatest are not always the most agreeable, nor the best to live with," which I think is very apropos of this marvelous and paradoxical river. Erma, let's talk about where is the Mojave River, and give us a little description of it.
The Mojave River does not begin in any one spot. It's the accumulation of the headwaters in the San Bernardino Mountains, but it's a runaway river. It should be flowing into the Pacific, but it's turned to go north and northeast, and finally winds up nowhere.
It just ends.
Just ends.
Just ends, which is very, very unusual. It's the only river like it in the world, isn't that right?
To my knowledge.
Yes. And of course, you should know, you spent, what, almost 24 years researching this book, is that right?
Just about.
Just about. That's a long, long time. Now, what good is a river like the Mojave?
It proved to be the pathway to the west. And it was life-saving for its campsites and the water that was there. If they knew how to go after it, there was water. Most of them were panicked, they're feeling because of the isolation of the desert, and did not know about the water within 15 feet.
Well, before we go on with this very paradoxical river, I wanted to introduce you first, but I would like to give credits. There are so many, so I'll try and give a few about Erma Peirson. She is a former resident of Apple Valley, Hesperia, and Barstow, and Mrs. Peirson is well known as an editor for her weekly regionals of the High Desert, which appeared in several local newspapers, also the Times Herald of Ridgecrest, and the Rocketeer of China Lake, of which she was editor for 6 years. For 2 years, she's had a column called Fresno's Past in the Fresno Guide, which covered the history of Fresno County. Then she was invited by the Kern County Historical Society to write the story of the eastern part of Kern County, which she titled Kern's Desert. And this book has had 3 printings, and that is indeed a record, isn't it, Erma?
Yes, I think
and
so.
That has gone down, too, in the archives as a very historical novel, correct?
It was the first, not a novel, but it was the first journalistic effort in Kern's Desert area.
Thank you very much, Erma. Well, let's get back to the book, and I'd like now to talk about where is the beauty of the Mojave River? Where is it?
It's in the contoured hills, in the mountains, in the sky, in the stark beauty of the dried grasses, the trees that grow, even though it's supposed to be a desert, there's a great deal of plant life.
I believe one said they're looking for, now what, we're going to talk about Father Garcia just a wee bit later. What was it he was looking for? A pathway, a grass, and what was the other one that he was looking for? And water, of course. That would be very, very important. Let's talk about the headwaters. I understand that Inez Huffman took you to the place where the rivers come together. Is that right, Inez?
It's where the two rivers meet. I think that is one of Erma's terms. That's where the West Fork of the Mojave and Deep Creek join to form the headwaters of the Mojave River.
And you took her there. Was it there that you had the experience with the quicksand?
No, I didn't take her there. We looked down upon it. To reach that point, it was quite a rugged walk over boulders and sand. And so one Sunday morning, I told Erma, I said, would you like very much to look down on where these two rivers meet? And she said she would. So we drove up to the lookout up above where these two branches of the river meets. And that is where we had our lovely experience.
With the quicksand?
No, the quicksand is later.
I must hear the story.
That's in sketching for the dust jacket.
Yes, well, tell us about that at the moment. Of course, the dust jacket is of the Upper Narrows.
The dust jacket, I'll tell you about the dust jacket. When I was asked to do the dust jacket for this very wonderful book, I gave it much consideration because there was so much material in the book and between the covers of the book that I felt that I must put something on the outside of it that would tell the story of what was to be found inside. And so I traveled the river with Erma at my side most of the time, and I chose the scene of the Upper Narrows because I was looking for a place, if you're going to tell the story of a river, it must have some water.
Yes.
And the Narrows, I could always find water at the Narrows. Of course, the lower Narrows, you can find water there too. But I chose the Upper Narrows because it was more of the rocky desert country that the river flows through. And of course, I happen to like the Upper Narrows.
Well, now I think we should establish where the Upper Narrows are.
Well, the Upper Narrows, I know, is between Apple Valley and Victorville.
That's what I want to say.
That is my description. The quicksand came in there. It was just after we'd had the flood, in 69,
Yes.
And we had so much water in the river, and I was waiting for it to get down so that I might sketch. And you know, the Narrows is not an easy place to get a view of. So anyway, I went out to sketch, and I was afraid to go by myself, so one of my best friend's husbands, John Colgan, went with me so that if I didn't return or else I got into trouble, I'd have someone with me. And I was, watching the Narrows going down the river, and all of a sudden 1 foot got in the quicksand.
Oh, dear.
Well, the first thing I knew, I was into the quicksand with one leg up above my knee. And then I had a camera around my neck, and in scrambling to get out of the quicksand, I gave myself a black eye. But John was so flabbergasted that he was ready to come to my rescue, but believe me, when you get into quicksand, it is quick.
Thank you very much, Inez Huffman. And now back to the book and Erma Peirson. Erma, tell us the first known man to see the Mojave River.
It was the Spanish priest who had come out from Spain at his own request to serve the savages in a new country. He traveled over on foot and some of the time with his mule.
Yes. And he was a very good friend of the Indians.
Yes.
And of course he had a very favorite guide, and his name was Sebastian.
Sebastian Terrible.
Isn't that a beautiful name?
Yes, it is.
And of course he was, as I say, friendly with the Indians, but at the end he proved a martyr because they did massacre him. Is that
Yes,
correct?
it was over policy matters.
Oh, I see. Would you mind telling us some of the various names given to this paradoxical river, the Mojave?
The discoverer named it the River of Martyrs, little knowing he would become a martyr for his own pains. The river, some priests along the way called it the Los Animas. We don't seem to have very much record of that, so we just know that somebody had been in there. I don't know just what Los Animas means in Spanish. They have called it the Upside Down River.
Yes, I like that one, don't you?
Yes. And the Wrong Way River.
The Inconstant River?
The Inconstant River, which it was given, the title was given by Jedediah Smith, the explorer.
Oh, I want to get into that later. There's so much in this book, we can only cover just bits and pieces of it. Yes. Let's talk a little of the Cajon Pass and its meaning. Of course, we all in this area know the Cajon Pass very, very well as we come into the Victor Valley area. Where is it located, and why was it called Cajon Pass? What does it mean?
The word Cajon means box. And this spot is a gateway, was a gateway as it is now, to the east and to the west.
And there are two ranges of mountains that the Cajon Pass goes through, is that right?
The San Gabriel and the San Bernardino, and these two mountains overlap.
Now, of course, this was a part of the old Spanish Trail.
It was the beginning of at the end of the Santa Fe Trail, it began to be called the Old Spanish Trail.
I see.
And it followed the Mojave River to the coast, where we'd go into the coastal area.
If I may pause for just a moment for a break. Thank you very much, Michael Dixon. And now back to Erma Peirson and a little coverage of her great book, The Mojave River and Its Valley. Erma, let's talk a little about John Brown Sr., Jr., and also James Brown, briefly.
John Brown Sr. was a very active, busy man in the West. He was one time with Fremont on one of his trips into the western country.
Yes.
He had a great part in building up the county of San Bernardino. He was one of the first legislators to go out from San Bernardino to Sacramento.
And his son, of course, was a historian, is that right?
His son, John Brown, Jr., wrote the history of Riverside County and San Bernardino County.
And now let's talk about James Brown. This will be rather close to our hearts, those who live in Victorville and Apple Valley and in our surrounding area. Tell us about James Brown.
There's a mistaken idea that somebody homesteaded the Verde country, which is not true. According to a government bulletin, James Brown, one of the sons of John S. Brown, was the first occupant of the Verde Ranch. And
now let's establish what the Verde Ranch is. We now know it as the Kemper Campbell Ranch, correct?
That flows in around the bottoms, river bottoms.
Yes.
It's a very beautiful area and one of the first places to be settled.
Is that all you would like to say at the moment about James Brown?
James Brown got his property by buying up relinquishments and government land.
I see. But it was not homesteaded.
It was not homesteaded. There were no homestead laws in 1860 when it was first settled.
That's a long time ago, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
Now let's talk a little about, we have to just sketch through these, but Jedediah S. Strong is his middle name, Smith, and also Fremont. We'd like to say something about that.
Jedediah Smith was forgotten for a long time before he was put in his proper place in the Hall of Fame. He came about 25 years after the priest Garcias had been here, and he was an explorer, and he was hunting beaver in this country. He ran into a little trouble with the government of Spain and was ordered out of the country, but he returned again. Made 2 trips through the desert, following the Mojave River to the San Joaquin Valley.
Yes, to the San Joaquin Valley.
He took a cutoff and went down into the San Joaquin Valley.
Now let's talk a little about the Mormon Trail, and this little memory jam, which I liked very, very much. The Mormon Trailways is the name of one of the chapters, and it says, "It seemed the Lord fitted the back for the burden," by Wallace Stegner. I like that, don't you?
Yes, it is.
Now, let's establish where the Mormon Trail began and ended, or if we really and truly know that information.
It began at the end of the Santa Fe Trail, where the Spanish Trail took up. And Mormons went this way and that way. They didn't always follow the trail.
Yes.
They were great people for finding a homestead.
And exploring, yes.
Not exploring so much as settling and getting a foothold in the new country.
In this book, The Mojave River and Its Valley, there are some beautiful photographs, and at this point I would like to give credit to Ruth Rutledge, whom most of you know, and Myra McGinnis, and also Florence Elwell, who contributed so much to the making of this book. Is that right, Erma?
She helped me a great deal in topic material.
And of course, we know Inez Huffman has been so close to this beautiful manuscript. Now, let's speak a little bit about the Las Flores Ranch, and many of us are familiar with that.
It is about the oldest settled spot in the west, in the desert. Over 100 years, cattle roamed into the mountains where they were lost. If they once got down deep into the Cajon, they were just gone. The ones that were stolen by the Indians, that's where they would hide them.
How big is that ranch? Do you know?
At one time, when I made a visit there at the request of the owners, they had 250,000 acres
dear.
through the
Quite a
desert and
ranch.
up into the crestline country.
And of course, it's been handed down from owner to owner, and now, of course, it's still a working ranch, as
Yes,
I
it is.
understand. And now, where exactly is it located?
Well, I can't just exactly tell you, only it flows, the west fork of the Mojave flows through the Flores Ranch.
Isn't that a beautiful name?
It was named for the many flowers by the
Yes.
people of Arrowhead, the many flowers of the desert.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Hesperia. Of course, Hesperia and the surrounding areas included in this. So briefly, tell us a little bit about Hesperia.
Well, it went through 3 different experiences trying to become a community. Every time when it was rained out or broken material or in their canals and it brought water into Hesperia, every time it revived and became a community until the last time, which is what we have today.
What,
Beautiful
1954,
Hesperia.
thereabouts? Yes.
About 1954, it was begun by Mr. Phillips.
I would like
Penn Phillips.
Penn Phillips, yes. I'd like to go back to the Las Flores Ranch and read this little a memory gem concerning that, which I think is beautiful. It's from Virgil. Let the fields and the guiding streams in the valley delight me. Inglorious, let me court the rivers and forests. I think that's so beautiful. And next we'll have a little memory jam about the kingdom, kingdom of the sun. But we'll get to that a wee bit later. Now, let's talk about our own Apple Valley.
Yes.
You're here.
I'm here.
Yes.
I lived here.
And tell us a little story about your little grandson.
Well, we were rather new in here, and the country was having some building at that time. It was 1965.
Yes.
And my son had a lovely home and a lovely little 4-year-old boy. And his name for me was Marnie. And every morning I would look out the windows and up on my desert, and sometimes I couldn't find my mountains. I made a big fuss over my mountains.
Yes.
One day little Kelly said, "Never mind, Marnie, they're not gone. They're just covered up with dirt."
I love that. Well, we'll have to rush along here, but would you like to say a word about Dead Man's Point?
Yes, it was one of the early spots of communication where people were traveling in and out of the mountains and the desert and on down to the south. The place has several names given or reasons for being called Dead Man's Point, but nobody knows for sure.
No one really knows. Of course, there's stories about the Mormons and the massacre and all of that sort of thing, but we then Indians, and we don't know that for sure. Now, Oro Grande, of course, played a great part in this, and that is where the lower Narrows are located.
It was first called Lane's Crossing, and they had a fort there, and people always stopped. It was life-giving, this trading post. And then finally gold was discovered and Oro Grande was made, and when the gold was gone, why, there was the wonderful cement to carry on to this day.
Yes, gold. Well, now we're going to talk a little about that. We must talk about Calico and Barstow, the
Yes,
beginning
indeed.
of that. Gold was discovered, silver was discovered, and then borax. Is that
And
correct?
borax.
Yes, and the beginning of Calico was the beginning of Barstow in a way, wasn't it? Tell us about
when
that.
the railroad came in, why, they had a station for stopping, and little by little the communities began to grow up, little ranches, and then when they found the silver and borax at Calico, why, the country was made.
And now, of course, Calico has been taken over and made into a profitable, I guess you might say, ghost town by Knott's Berry Farm, Mr. Knott, isn't that right?
That's right, to show the people, I suppose, of coming generations what an old mining camp was like.
Yes. When was gold and silver discovered there?
Well, gold was discovered up in Holcomb Creek, where the river began, in 1860.
Now we're going to talk about the kingdom of the sun. And may I read this by Walt Whitman? I like it so much. Give me the splendid silent sun with all its beams full blazing. Walt Whitman. I love these headings. I think they're just great. Now, what comprises the kingdom of the sun?
Well, the Kingdom of the Sun was the name of a little magazine which people were bringing out on their own, and there were about 4 copies printed. And they're very, very hard to find. They're just treasures if you find one.
Yes.
And they called it the Kingdom of the Sun. And people came out buying property as well as homesteading.
Mm-hmm.
And they built up a beautiful life out here, and the people were very, very happy.
And what are the villages that comprise the kingdom of the sun?
Oh, Apple Valley, Hesperia, Victorville, and Ora Grande.
Uh-huh.
And Barstow was a little far away to be considered in it, although there was still communication between the 2 areas.
But I love that, the kingdom of the sun. It's so beautiful. Our time is running very short. I'm going to have to end the interview, Erma Peirson, and I do thank you so very much for being here this morning. And I would like to end in this way. This is written by Erma Peirson from her beautiful book, The Mojave River and Its Valley. And I think it describes exactly the feeling that we have for this area. Why did the desert happen? Why did time seem to stand still? The answer is simple. It stopped raining. I like that. So simple. The sunlight shimmering on the space, sand, gravel, and salt-encrusted nodules over which winds blow and carry the infinite grains of sand, so fine and powdery to form the dunes and ridges. This is the sink of the Mojave. Thank you very much, Erma Peirson.
Pleasure to be here.
And now, Inez Huffman, you have an announcement to make?
Thank you, Fanny. The Apple Valley Victorville branch of the National League of American Penwomen, of which Erma happens to be one of the charter members, is sponsoring a reception for her and an autograph party. That is today. At my home, which I'll give you the address in just a moment, between 2 and 4 this afternoon and 7 and 10 this evening. We'd be real happy to invite those that are interested to come out and meet the author, and if you have a book that you have purchased and would like to have Erma autograph it, we'll be real happy to have you. And my address is 9445 Yucca Street, Apple Valley.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Inez Huffman.